In the late 1990s, few video game developers were as synonymous with PC role-playing games as Black Isle Studios. Established in 1996 as a subsidiary of Interplay Entertainment, Black Isle helped create and foster an array of beloved isometric RPG series, including Icewind Dale, Planescape, Torment, and Fallout. Of all its works, Fallout set itself apart with its 50s Americana-inspired post-apocalyptic setting and open-ended design, which enabled players to craft their journey through the irradiated remains of the United States with an unprecedented level of freedom, whether allowing them to be the scourge of all that is living, a pacifist capable of convincing their foes to surrender, or a straggler just trying to get by. Both Fallout and its sequel exemplified the power of player choice in games and served as hallmarks of Black Isle's talent. After years of false starts, development on a third mainline entry in the series for the PC materialized, one that would have seen the player embroiled in a plot involving escaped convicts, a mysterious virus, and a calamitous space station. Unfortunately, despite coming within striking distance of being completed, both this project and Black Isle as a whole would be shut down in late 2003, snuffed out by Interplay's financial woes and shifting priorities. Their ends were tragic, yet both Fallout and the talent that shepherded it would live on, with the former becoming one of the biggest names in gaming, and the latter joining a new development studio that would eventually incorporate elements of their canceled entry into their works. This is the story of Van Buren, the original Fallout 3.
Welcome to the Interplay Productions tour of facilities. My name is Bill Dugan, and I'll be taking you on a tour of Interplay, where we make games so you won't have to. I'm sure you've heard of Interplay. We've made games like Battle Chess, Lord of the Rings, and...
In 1998, Interplay Entertainment was in dire straits. The company continued to produce hit after hit, with Black Isle's Fallout 2 releasing in September that year to widespread acclaim. But financially, it was struggling, with many of its critical successes failing to translate into commercial ones. In an attempt to avoid bankruptcy, Interplay decided to go public and enter the stock market. The move briefly helped, and yet, despite both this and the studio continuing to publish blockbuster titles such as Baldur's Gate 2, Interplay once again found itself in the hot seat 3 years later. A slew of costly bets, such as the founding of Interplay's sports division and ambitious titles such as Free Space 2 and Messiah, had failed to pay dividends. And try as it could, the company had yet to gain a foothold in the lucrative home console market, with expensive efforts such as Heart of Darkness and Wild 9 for the PlayStation failing to gain much traction. Desperate, the company sought funding from French publisher Titus Interactive, which supplied Interplay with a series of assuaging investments before ultimately acquiring a majority stake in them by 2001. While in control of Interplay, Titus did its best to perform triage and keep it alive. But in the words of Black Isle alum Fergus Urquhart, they just did not have the vision. Where Interplay's original management took risks and launched new properties at a seemingly breakneck pace, that of Titus was conservative and shrewd, selling its lesser properties and subsidiary studios, such as Shiny Entertainment, while canceling promising yet troubled projects, such as Black Isle's Torn. The clash of cultures was enough to prompt Interplay's co-founder and head Brian Fargo to depart it in 2002 to found In Exile Entertainment. All the while this was happening, the Fallout series took a back seat. Outside of the 2001 spin-off title Fallout Tactics, which was created by Australian developer Microforte, a new mainline entry courtesy of Black Isle remained elusive. A successor to Fallout 2 featuring entirely 3D environments had actually briefly entered production after 2's release, with Fergus Urquhart explaining to IGN in 2017 that the project was progressing well, but that development fizzled out when Interplay's financial woes intensified. Since then, Interplay had been unable to commit the resources necessary to jumpstart development of a third game, but continued to promise that it would eventually happen. Knowing this, Black Isle's chief designer at the time, Chris Avallone, took it upon himself in his spare time to start prototyping. As revealed in a presentation at New York University in 2015, Avallone wanted the team's third Fallout title to feature a rival party operating concurrently to the game's protagonist, that would affect the game's world just as the player does.
What we would do is sometimes we would actually do cutscenes and cinematics for things that were actually taking place elsewhere in the world and actually introduce characters the players hadn't met yet, but sort of give us to sort of like hint about things that were to come, which is a lot of fun to do.
In order to test this idea, 2 teams of Black Isle staff were tasked with playtesting 2 separate pen and paper prototypes of his vision of Fallout 3, with Avalon implementing the effects of choices made by each team into the other's session. The tabletop-style prototyping quickly turned into an engaging and competitive affair, and helped supply Avalon with plenty of narrative and mechanical material for when production of the game proper would begin. Eventually, Black Isle found itself working on Baldur's Gate 3, The Black Hound. Featuring a completely original cast of characters and story from previous entries, Black Hound would have utilized the studio's newly minted Jefferson engine, which would allow the title to ditch its predecessor's 2D graphics in favor of full 3D environments, illuminated with real-time lighting and shadows. Unfortunately, just as the project was nearing completion, Interplay lost the license to make Dungeons & Dragons games for the PC in mid-2003, resulting in Black Hound, whose setting was derived from the former, being abruptly cancelled. Looking to recoup the costs of Black Hound's development, production immediately began on a new Fallout game using the Jefferson engine. It was an abrupt start, but thanks to both the studio's talent and Chris Avalon's earlier prototyping, the project, codenamed Van Buren after the 8th American president, would quickly become an immense source of pride for the team.
So all of this stuff was really valuable once Van Buren actually went into production, which occurred once Baldur's Gate 3 was canceled at the studio very suddenly, and then suddenly the entire Baldur's Gate 3 team got moved over to Fallout 3. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff was able to be helpful for concept artists and designers to sort of hit the ground running.
Van Buren would have taken place in the American Southwest in 2253, 11 years after the events of Fallout 2. The player would have assumed control of the prisoner, who finds themselves incarcerated for reasons unknown in Tibbet's prison, an automated penitentiary run by an advanced AI called Odysseus. After the facility is rocked by an explosion, the player would escape to the wasteland, whereupon they would begin hunting down and returning other escapees to the prison in order to stop Odysseus's security robots from pursuing them and discover the meaning behind their incarceration. In tandem to this happening, the player's party would have been forced to deal with the machinations of Victor Presper, a mad scientist with ambitions to cleanse the wasteland of any life deemed impure. The game would also depict a war between the power armor-wielding Brotherhood of Steel and the domineering New California Republic, with the player's actions during the game influencing the conflict's outcome. Helping out a Republic-controlled settlement built around the remains of the Hoover Dam, for example, would eventually allow the player to locate the Brotherhood's base of operations and negotiate peace between both sides. Eventually, it would be revealed that both the player and the other prisoners had been infected by Presper with a genetically engineered virus known as Limit 115. By infecting the convicts with the virus and letting them run free, Presper intended to manipulate Odysseus into activating Bomb 001, a ballistic space station in orbit above the Earth that would contain the virus by nuking the areas the prisoners escaped to. Then, before it could do so, Presper would board the station and reprogram its salvo so that he could cleanse the world to his liking. Armed with this knowledge, the game would conclude with the player infiltrating Bomb 001 using a repaired spaceship to confront the Presper party once and for all. Mechanically, Van Buren would have utilized a highly modified version of Fallout 1 and 2's Special system, the Fallout series' statistical representation of the player's abilities. In addition to the way in which the player's statistics influenced their performance on the field being calculated differently, the player would have only had access to 13 skills instead of 18. The prisoner's mechanics would be further influenced by their race, with the player, for the first time in the series' history, able to play as a human, a ghoul, or a super mutant, each of which would possess their own unique skills, perks, and limitations. And perhaps most excitingly, the player would have been able to select theme music for their character. When played, one of the player's abilities would be temporarily boosted, creating what could have likely been immensely cinematic moments. Finally, as a result of the then recent success of Blizzard's Diablo, pressure was put on Black Isle by Interplay to allow players to use a real-time combat system in the style of Fallout Tactics and feature a cooperative multiplayer mode. However, little is known as to the nature of the latter. As exciting as Van Buren was, however, many within Black Isle couldn't let themselves be lost in the revelry of developing it. The cancellation of Blackhound earlier that year had left many employees shaken. Interplay had suffered financial hardship for years at this point, but the loss of the Dungeons & Dragons license seemed to imply that the studio had finally reached its end. Not wanting to be part of two canceled dream projects in a row, many of Black Isle's employees would thus gradually depart the company over the course of Van Buren's development, with several key staff, including Urquhart and Avalon, founding Obsidian Entertainment shortly after leaving. Finally, in December of 2003, both Van Buren and Black Isle were shut down. The decision makers at Titus were ready to move on from the PC and focus exclusively on developing games for the console market. Developers and fans of Black Isle alike were crestfallen, not just because the world had lost another potential classic, but much like Blackhound before it, Van Buren had seemingly come very close to completion. According to a Game Banshee interview with Black Isle's John Diley, the game's engine was 95% complete, with 75% of the audio and half of the game's maps finished. These percentages were likely never going to rise again, and Interplay's Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, an action-focused spin-off released the following month for the Xbox and PlayStation 2, did little to assuage fans concerned as to the series' overall future.
I love those dear hearts and gentle people.
Things would begin to look up, however, when in July of 2004, it was announced that Interplay had auctioned off the rights to the Fallout franchise to Bethesda, best known for the acclaimed Elder Scrolls series of role-playing games, and that the latter studio would be working on their own version of Fallout 3. 3 years later, Fallout fan site No Mutants Allowed would obtain a copy of a tech demo of Van Buren. Buggy, yet tantalizing, Josh Sawyer would explain soon after that the demo was a portion of what was going to be the game's tutorial. Then in October of 2008, Bethesda would finally release their version of Fallout 3 for the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC. The game proved to be an immense success, earning rave reviews and catapulting the Fallout franchise into mainstream stardom. But amongst older fans, it was not universally embraced. The game's persistent world and vast 3D environments allowed for a sense of wonder and discovery that Black Isle's titles had never been able to achieve. Yet mechanically, the game represented a break from that of its predecessors' traditions that was hard to reconcile. Bethesda had done an incredible job in achieving what they had set out to create, but what they had created was not Van Buren. As if attempting to directly address older fans' frustrations, Obsidian Entertainment, Black Isle's de facto successor, would end up being tasked by Bethesda with designing the next Fallout title, Fallout New Vegas. In addition to featuring several mechanical changes that render the title slightly more in line with Fallout 1 and 2, New Vegas's plot and setting incorporate numerous conceits that were to originally be included in Van Buren, such as Kaisar's Legion, the Burned Man, and the Hoover Dam, albeit all modified in various ways. While by no means a remake of Van Buren, the game is effectively the closest thing Fallout fans will likely ever receive to experiencing the canceled title from a narrative perspective.
From where you're kneeling must seem like an 18-carat run of bad luck. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
Whether the world will ever get to experience Van Buren's gameplay outside of the title's limited demo remains to be seen. In December of 2014, Brian Fargo trademarked Van Buren, explaining to Eurogamer the following year that while he himself and In Exile have no immediate plans to do anything with the trademark, both Fargo and Chris Avallone have discussed reviving the brand in some fashion once the two have the time to do so. Seeing as how the rights to the Fallout franchise currently remain in the hands of Bethesda, it is unlikely that this project will use the settings or characters that it was originally designed around, should it even begin. Yet, whether it does or not, it's hard to argue against the illusory potential of a new Van Buren, an old-school Fallout experience peppered with truly unique ideas and concepts, unseen by any title since. Our documentaries are crowdfunded and made possible by the generous supporters backing us on Patreon. If you enjoy our content, consider subscribing to our channel and becoming a patron to help us create more. Thank you.